Welcome, everyone. My name is Diana Bino, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County, Maryland. This month, the League is celebrating its 106th anniversary as a nonpartisan organization whose mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. As part of this mission, we sponsor webinars to inform the public about important issues. Tonight's Trending Topics program is co-sponsored with Montgomery History. Montgomery History is dedicated to making our past inclusive and relevant to all Montgomery County residents. Few topics have shaped this community more over the last 50 years than immigration. Support for our programs comes from viewers like you. We welcome your donations because they help us provide high-quality webinars and other services at no charge to the public. To support our organizations, visit our websites. The links are in the chat. Tonight's program examines the status of civil and human rights for immigrant and refugee populations in our county. During these tumultuous and troubling times, Montgomery History and the League of Women Voters believe that exploring topics such as immigrant rights helps us to better understand our collective history and guide informed civic engagement. Did you know that the League of Women Voters has a robust immigrant rights position? It supports immigrant policies that promote the reunification of immediate families, that meet the economic, business, and employment needs of the United States, and is responsive to those facing political persecution or humanitarian crises, and provides for student visas. These policies should ensure fair treatment under the law for all persons, and in transition to a reformed system, should support provisions for unauthorized immigrants already in the country to earn legal status. Currently, we seek to mobilize members of the League and public to defend those rights as part of our United and Rise 8.5 initiative to protect and preserve our democracy. What about here in Montgomery County? Approximately 33% of the total population of over 1 million people, or about 347,000 residents, are foreign-born. This is an increase of 10% over the past 10 years. The majority are from El Salvador, but others arrive from India, from China, Ethiopia, and Korea. They are naturalized U.S. citizens, they are permanent residents, and the unauthorized population is estimated to be about 75,000 to 100,000, mainly from the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Before I introduce our moderator, I have a few reminders. This session is presented for educational purposes only. The views expressed are those of the speakers. No endorsement or support by the League of Women Voters should be assumed for any individual or view. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the League's YouTube channel at a later date. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media. We've put the links in the chat box for you. The audience will be muted during the webinar, and the chat box has been disabled. After our speakers' presentations, we will have a Q&A session. To submit a question, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question into the box, and then hit send or return. Only the moderator will see the questions. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. The program is scheduled to end at 8:30 p.m. Now, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator. Maria Sprain is a professor of anthropology at Montgomery College. A native Washingtonian and daughter of Spanish refugees, her current research focuses on Latino culture and the history of immigration. She's recently co-curated with Montgomery History a virtual exhibit on immigration to Montgomery County. And she's the co-author of a book, Latinos in the Washington metro area. She's currently working on a Latino history of Gaithersburg and on a project celebrating Montgomery County's 250th anniversary, an anniversary shared with the nation. Maria, now it's all yours.
Thank you, Diane, and our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters and Montgomery History. Tonight we have three speakers. Amma Frimpong is the director at CASA, where she oversees legal services in immigration, employment, and housing. Legal director, while also she contributes to policy advocacy and organizing efforts. Stephanie Wolf is the director of the Immigration Services Division in the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. And Earl Stoddard is an assistant chief administrative officer within the Office of the Executive for Montgomery County. Now I'd like to introduce Alma Frimpong, the legal director at CASA. Founded 40 years ago in response to U.S. intervention in Central America, CASA plays a leading role in defending immigrant communities, including litigating cases challenging the termination of birthright citizenship and temporary protective status, or TPS, as well as leading efforts to limit collaborations between local law enforcement and ICE, with particular emphasis on ending 287G agreements. CASA also educates immigrants about their constitutional rights and trains citizen volunteers to respond to immigration enforcement actions. Ms. Frimpong will address what is happening with respect to the civil and human rights of immigrant populations and how Montgomery County's response to the current situation fits into what the rest of Maryland is doing. Ms. Frimpong?
Yes, thank you so much, Maria. Good evening to all of you. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you for choosing to spend your evening with us. And thanks for that great introduction, Maria. I am the legal director. That's correct. We do have a new executive director at CASA, and that is not me, but thank you anyway. One of the things that we do at CASA, or that we've been doing at CASA over the past year since January 2025, is we've run an ICE reporting detention hotline, right? And so this is a number that individuals can call to report immigration enforcement actions that are happening throughout our region. We also have a legal services team, right, which I oversee, that provides extended legal assistance to individuals detained by ICE. In 2025, CASA responded to 567 confirmed ICE arrests in Maryland. Of those 567 confirmed ICE arrests, about 132, or a quarter of those, were from Montgomery County. In addition, our legal team provided legal assistance to more than 2,500 Maryland residents with diverse immigration statuses, with over half of those being Montgomery County residents. And so what I want to share today, right, is essentially patterns, right, that we have noticed from our work providing direct services to individuals impacted by ICE arrest in the state. And the first one that I want to share is who is being arrested. All right, so under previous federal immigration policy, that typically under previous federal immigration policies, we see what are called enforcement priorities, right? And so, what the federal administration determines who is considered a priority for immigration enforcement, and typically focuses the administration's limited resources on those who are considered priorities. The first pattern that we've noticed with who is being arrested is that everyone is a priority under current federal immigration policy. This means regardless of criminal history. This means regardless of how long they've been here within the country. That this means regardless of what's ties they have to their community, everyone is considered a priority for immigration enforcement. We've seen I think mo hopefully many of you have seen the recent numbers from the Deportation Data Project, which were released in October 2025, showing that of those arrested for suspected immigration violations in Maryland, from January through October 2025, only one-third of those arrested in Maryland had criminal convictions, and over 50% had no criminal history whatsoever. Again, what we're seeing is that regardless of your criminal history or their lack of, you are considered a priority for immigration enforcement under this federal administration. Again, those who have been in this country for decades, right, with significant ties to the community, to the state, to the county, individuals who have just lived and worked here and raised their families here without issue, are now, have also been arrested for immigration enforcement. Um, and again, right, as to who is being arrested, it's not just individuals who are documented, right? Individuals who don't have authorized lawful status. One thing that I do want to note is the fact that we have seen tens of thousands of Marylanders be de-documented and now considered deportable. What I mean by that is individuals who had some form of lawful status, such as parole or temporary protected status, which allowed them to remain in the country lawfully, work here, live here lawfully. What we have seen since January 2025 is that there has been a deliberate attempt to strip them of those protected statuses, to then arrest them and deport them. And those who have had certain protections from deportation are also being now arrested and deported, such as individuals who have statuses that we call withholding of removal or protection under the Convention Against Torture, through which a judge has said that those individuals should not be deported to their home countries. And so those individuals have been, again, living here for years without issue, checking in with ICE without issue. Those individuals are now being enforced against. Another pattern that we have noticed is how individuals are being arrested. So one of the things that has been most shocking for us over the past year in the reports that we receive on the hotline and what our clients, and what we know to be true, is the fact that they are now, immigration officers' tactics have become increasingly aggressive and unlawful, including stops without reasonable suspicion, which I know that my colleague Stephanie Wolf will get into, arrests without probable cause, and physical brutality during arrests. And so we are seeing several incidents of individuals being physically harmed when being arrested, even when they are not resisting arrest. We have seen, again, law-abiding individuals who have been complying with their ICE reporting requirements for years without issue. They now show up to report to ICE as they are required to, whether it's once a year or every 6 months. Those individuals are being arrested for complying with the law. We have seen an expansion in the use of state and local resources to enforce immigration law, or I guess I should say an expansion in the use of local resources to enforce immigration law, particularly through what we call 287G agreements, right? And so here in the state of Maryland in January 2025, there were only 3 counties that participated in 287G agreements, which essentially deputize local law enforcement officers to perform the functions of immigration officers. And through January 2026, that number was now 9 counties. That number had tripled. So this is where I must give a shout out to the Maryland General Assembly for passing a bill to ban 287G agreements in the state of Maryland. And we have also seen we have also seen simultaneously an increase in local level efforts to push back against ICE overreach. And I know that my colleague Earl Stoddard will also speak on that specifically to Montgomery County. And I'm gonna get through the rest of this more quickly. I know that I'm probably running out of time. Um, Another pattern that we have noticed is just the egregious civil and human rights violations that occur throughout the arrests, detention, and deportation process. We are seeing rapid deportations in violation of the law. What do I mean by that? Two very specific examples. We're seeing the expansion of the use of expedited removal. Expedited removal is a process, or I guess lack of process, in which certain categories of people are quickly deported without ever having the chance to see an immigration judge, right? To be able to meaningfully um, defend against deportation. And so we have seen, for example, the federal administration try to expand the use of expedited removal to people who have had lawful statuses within the country. And I should also say a lot of what I'm talking about, CASA has been actively litigating. So this is one of the issues that we are also litigating. And then the other kind of and then the second specific example is an expansion of the use of third country removals. Prior to January 2025, if someone had those withholding of removal or protection under the Convention Against Torture, those protections that prohibited someone from being deported to their home country, even though they could, theoretically could be deported to another country that is not theirs, we never saw them actually being deported to a third country. They were able to live here lawfully without issue. And now we're seeing very egregious examples of people who ICE is deporting to a third country, and then that third country is rerouting them to the very country that a judge had said that they not be deported to. So there are some very specific examples of individuals right here in the state of Maryland, including Rabiatu Kuyate, who hopefully people saw the viral video of her being dragged onto a plane in Ghana after ICE deported her to Ghana, and Ghana then just rerouted her to her home country of Sierra Leone, where a judge had found that she would more likely than not be tortured if she were returned to that country. And then, of course, we are seeing the egregious conditions of confinement throughout the country. But I say look no further than right here in Maryland, 31 Hopkins Plaza, Baltimore, where ICE operates what is supposed to be a temporary holding facility, and yet ICE is using that as a long-term detention facility where there is one public toilet for over 50 people in a singular cell to share. There are no mattresses, beds, there are no showers, right? And people are being held in these conditions. And I think just yesterday or 2 days ago, you know, I a couple of weeks ago there was a viral video, right, showing the conditions within that cell. And just a couple of days ago, I believe there was a whistleblower, right, who has started speaking publicly about the conditions in that holding room, including people being left to sleep in their urine and in their feces. And this is happening right here in Maryland, where individuals who are arrested in the state and in Montgomery County are sent. And the final thing that I will say before I turn it over to my colleagues is the way that detention is being used under current federal administration policy. Detention is being used as a coercive tool to force people to give up their rights to defend against deportation, right? We have received credible reports of ICE threatening people, right? Saying, well, if you don't sign your deportation order right now, you're just going to continue being in this jail, or we're going to move you to a different detention center where your loved ones can't even find you, right? We have received very disturbing reports of intentional torture within facilities, bags being placed over people's heads, people's hand, ICE holding people's hands to force them to sign their deportation orders, things like that. And now the vast majority of people have no way to request release from ICE detention because policy has suddenly been changed, rendering them ineligible for release on bond. So those are just some of the patterns that we have been seeing, very disturbing patterns, obviously. But I do, of course, I'm happy to take any questions that come in the Q&A, and I will turn it back over to you, Maria, for our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frimpong. That is quite a bit of information. Thank you very much. I just want to ask one follow-up question, if I may. How can community members partner with CASA in supporting our neighbors at risk from ICE?
Oh, that is such a wonderful question. And I know that Stephanie is going to talk about some of our policy pieces, so I will leave that to her. Um, but outside of, supporting on immigrant protection legislation, there are many different opportunities. Certainly making sure to learn what our rights are and to be able to educate community members on what those rights are. And so CASA has routine know your rights workshops where folks can learn this information and where folks can then partner with us to go to different locations to essentially train vulnerable community members on those rights. And another thing that I will highlight is also, of course, calling the hotline, if you do witness any type of immigration enforcement action. And this is also a great time to shout out some of our partners. The DMV Accompaniment Network. I see Suzanti putting some stuff in here. The DMV Accompaniment Network is an excellent um, resource and network, right, through which we are able to pair individuals with upcoming court dates or ICE check-ins, right, with someone to accompany them. And so we route, quite a few people over to the DMV accompaniment network, and I think that would be a great place to plug in. And the final thing that I will say is another excellent network that has formed, which is a local immigration court watch group, which once I will look for the information in my inbox and I will drop the link in here. But they have also been doing excellent work. Observing immigration court hearings and then reporting back because then we are able to prepare community members effectively before they go to court because we know what is happening within the courtroom.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm sure people can be directed to the CASA website for even more information. So thank you very much. So now I would like to introduce Stephanie Wolf, Director of the Immigration Services Division in the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. This division trains public defenders in immigration law, provides consults about immigration consequences of individual cases involving non-citizen clients, and advocates for due process and equitable treatment of non-citizens within the Maryland criminal legal system. Before beginning this role, which has taken her to courts around the state, she was a felony attorney in Prince George's County, Maryland, and worked as an assistant federal public defender in Las Cruces, New Mexico, near the U.S.-Mexican border. Ms. Wolf will address the legal framework associated with what ICE is authorized to do. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and I'll echo Amma's appreciation for your choosing to spend your Thursday night this way. You might be wondering why the Public Defender's Office is here at an immigration webinar, and the reason is that there's a lot of overlap. Amma has told you so much about the trends and the patterns that we're seeing and how prioritization of ICE arrests has kind of gone out the window over the last year. And that ICE is no longer sort of targeting people who it believes poses some risk to public safety. But that doesn't mean that our criminal legal system isn't helping funnel people into the deportation pipeline. It really is. And that is something that we've been advocating very strongly to try to limit and stop in the General Assembly this year and at several different county level county council legislative bodies. So I want to start just by talking about the legal framework that applies to arrests and detentions. And this Fourth Amendment framework goes back, to the Bill of Rights. This is very old. This is not specific to ICE. This applies to police officers as well. To arrest somebody, you need probable cause of a crime for which that officer has arrest authority. And you either need a warrant or one of the exceptions to the warrant requirement has to apply. We don't need to get into what the exceptions are tonight, but you need probable cause of a crime. You need the authority to make the arrest, and you either need a warrant or a good reason not to have one. And a warrant is signed by a judge or a magistrate. That's a neutral fact finder who looks at the application for the warrant and decides whether there really is probable cause. That's to arrest someone. But there's a smaller kind of a detention that doesn't rise to the level of an arrest. That's generally called a stop. Sometimes we call it a Terry stop. And to stop somebody without arresting them, or to prolong their detention if you've already stopped them for some reason, you need reasonable suspicion of a crime or a violation, like a traffic violation, for which the officer has enforcement authority. So to arrest someone, you need probable cause. To stop them or prolong the stop, you need reasonable suspicion. Where this gets tricky with ICE is that ICE likes to use the language of the Fourth Amendment without having a real Fourth Amendment basis to do the detentions that it does. So ICE issues documents that it calls warrants and detainers. And detainers is a term that's used to talk about requests when one law enforcement agency has a warrant for someone's arrest and they want a jail, usually in another jurisdiction, to hold that person based on their warrant. They issue a detainer. But in the normal criminal context, that detainer comes with a warrant and probable cause signed by a judge. And when ICE issues these documents, these warrants and these detainers, these are administrative documents that they issue independently. There's no oversight by a judge or a court at all. There's no external legal force to those documents. These are documents that ICE issues on its own. ICE warrants tell other ICE officers, hey, we, ICE, want to make a civil immigration arrest of this person. And they are authorized by a federal statute to make civil immigration arrests. But an ICE warrant cannot direct a local police officer to make a civil arrest. There's no probable cause. There's no crime. There's not even an allegation of a crime because a civil immigration offense is not a crime. And so although they write warrant at the top, it really is a very different thing. And ICE detainers are a request from ICE to a jail or a detention facility of some kind that jail notify ICE 48 hours before they're going to let the person out. So make a phone call, say the person's getting out on Tuesday, and the purpose of that is to allow ICE to be waiting when the door opens to make that arrest. Or they ask the detention facility to actually hold the person for an extra 48 hours to transfer the person to ICE. So I know this is a little bit technical, but it is very important to realize that when ICE is making these requests of our local officials, they are asking them, if they're saying hold this person an extra 2 days, they're asking them to violate the Fourth Amendment. So we have some protections in Maryland against those Fourth Amendment violations. We obviously have the Fourth Amendment itself, but we also have a Maryland state law that puts some limits on police officers on the street on the one hand, and correctional officers in the jail on the other. So the police are much more limited. Maryland state law makes very clear police officers are not allowed to interrogate somebody about their immigration status. They're not allowed to detain the person or prolong their detention in order to investigate their immigration status. So, for example, if they pull you over for speeding, they can't say, "Hey, where are you from? I hear you have an accent. Are you a US citizen? Let me see your paperwork." That would be illegal under Maryland law. But there's a loophole to this protection, which is that Maryland police officers are not prohibited from communicating with ICE as long as the communication doesn't cause the detention or prolong the detention. And so, what can happen, and in fact, what is required by many police procedures across the state, is that if they pull you over for speeding, and they take your license and they run your license through a national database. If they see in that database that ICE has entered a warrant, but again, not a real warrant, not reviewed by a judge to determine probable cause, but an administrative document that ICE issued on its own, if they see that in that national database, they can call ICE and communicate about you with immigration authorities. Now, they're not supposed to let that communication prolong your traffic stop at all. And maybe they even do it after you've driven away, but that is incredibly dangerous because there's no limit on what they can say. They can say, this person is traveling northbound on this road. Here's the license plate of their car. There's no prohibition on that right now. And I think many police departments have tried very hard. I know Montgomery County Police Department has been very vocal about saying we don't do this. And that's great. But statewide, that is not the case. And there's a wide variety. And I think when people don't know which particular police department is behind them, it doesn't help enough to say that many police departments do not do this, because some of them do, some of them require their officers to do that, and that's really terrifying. Now, in the jail, there are many fewer protections. The only protection really is the Fourth Amendment, which means you can't hold somebody on an ICE detainer. Now, there's a lot of confusion about this around the state, but I think the Fourth Amendment is clear. Holding somebody, once the state judge has said let them out, if you hold somebody only because of an ICE detainer that's never been reviewed by a judge, doesn't establish probable cause of a crime, and for which the state officers don't have arrest authority anyway, that is illegal. But there's an exception, and that is what Amma has mentioned a few times, which is a 287G agreement. And that actually allows the local jail official to take off their local jail official hat, put on their deputized ICE agent hat, and make a civil immigration arrest with lawful authority. And that's authority that's granted by a federal statute. And so that is under current law until Governor Moore signs the ban on 287G. That is allowed and has been allowed for many years in Maryland. It happened very commonly, and it has separated a lot of people from their families after very minor contacts with law enforcement. So, what is legal in Maryland as of right now? Like I said, police and jail officials can, but they're not required to, at least not by state law. They're not required to communicate with ICE after an encounter. And that could be a traffic stop, it could be an arrest, it could be, they're called to break up a fight or something like that, and they don't make any arrest. Some departments require that of their officers. Some jails require their officers to communicate with ICE in some or all cases. And that's to communicate if ICE has said we are looking for this person. But there are actually lots of jails around the state that will affirmatively call ICE. If they bring a person in at booking, and that person says, they will ask as a matter of course, where were you born? And if the person reports that they were born outside the United States, there are many jails in Maryland that will pick up the phone, or actually they send a fax to ICE that says, hey, this person reports they're foreign born. Do you want to arrest them? And that's somebody that ICE wasn't necessarily even looking for. And so we are using our criminal legal system. And again, when this is happening, this is just somebody who's been arrested. They haven't been convicted of a crime at this stage. They, in many cases, when they're in a local jail, they're released before their trial date. And it's just, okay, you've been arrested for disorderly conduct or DUI or driving without a license. Come back in a month or two for your trial date. But if our jails and our police officers are calling ICE to make sure that arrest happens, these people are never getting their day in court. And these very minor contacts can lead that person to being placed into the deportation pipeline. So that type of communication is legal. However, it is not legal in Maryland as of today to hold a person beyond their release on the state charge. So if the person gets arrested, then the judge decides they're going to be released, or a commissioner decides they're going to be released, personal recognizance, come back to court later, or perhaps they're found not guilty, or perhaps their case is dismissed. That person cannot be held longer. You can't say, I'm going to wait those 2 days that ICE has asked me to wait to allow ICE to come and make an arrest. That requires a separate constitutional justification, a Fourth Amendment basis. And even if there was probable cause to think this person was undocumented, that they could be arrested for a civil immigration violation by ICE, that wouldn't give us the right to make that arrest, says local officials, because local officials are not on the list of authorities that are authorized to make that type of civil immigration arrest. That's a specific list in the federal code, and we just aren't on it. So ICE would really like Maryland police and Maryland jail officials to carry their water. And they have lots of different ways of asking localities to do that, but it is not legal to keep somebody detained on behalf of ICE for a civil immigration arrest without a court order. So who does this impact? When the police contact ICE about somebody that they aren't taking to jail, that's kind of the most extreme situation. There's a stop for speeding. The person, you see in the federal database that this person has an immigration warrant. And instead of letting that person go on their way like you would with anybody else, you call ICE and tell them that you've just had this encounter, and ICE perhaps can come and make that arrest. That could be anyone, right? That is not a person who is even suspected of any kind of criminal activity, right? It could be a witness in a case. It could be somebody who's been pulled over for a traffic violation. There's no real limit on what population of people you're talking about. That's also typically going to be people who are engaged with the immigration system in some way, because the reason that their name is in that database is because DHS, they're known to DHS. Perhaps they have an application pending or something like that. These are not people who are entirely under the radar, otherwise they wouldn't be in that database to begin with. The other category of people is folks who are arrested and brought into a local jail. And that, although, I think there is often this sense of, well, they've been arrested, right? These are criminals. People have done something wrong. That is just not the case. The folks who get arrested, there are people who are innocent. There are people who have committed very minor offenses. And who gets arrested in America depends a lot on who you are, how policed your community is, and a lot of things that are related to your race and your level of income. So people can be arrested in Maryland for having let their insurance lapse. They can be arrested in Maryland for driving without a license, and it's very difficult for people to get a driver's license if they are undocumented. You can be arrested in Maryland based on a citizen's complaint, which is just any person can go to the commissioner's office and swear out a criminal complaint against another person with no investigation by the police. Um, and that can result in people getting arrested. So it is not safe to assume that everyone who is arrested has done something wrong. And then the people who get out of those local jails are generally being released either before they've had a trial, after they've been found not guilty, or after their charges have been dismissed or resolved in some way without their being convicted. There are some people who get convicted and still get released from a local jail, but those are people who are serving a short local sentence on a less serious offense. Generally, if you get convicted of a serious offense with a long sentence, you're going to go to the Department of Corrections, which is not run by the local jurisdictions that tend to have these agreements to partner with ICE. So this hurts some really vulnerable people. I don't want to go too long here, but I did want to give kind of an example of a gentleman who was arrested. He was accused of assault. Could be a serious offense. This gentleman said, "I want my day in court." He waited in jail for several months until he had his trial. He went to trial and he was found not guilty. And because of cooperation between the local jail and ICE, after he was after he was found not guilty, he was held for several additional days to wait for ICE to come pick him up in violation of the Fourth Amendment. And then he was put into the deportation pipeline. So that is not due process. And that is an example of the way that our legal system, which I think at its best provides people with due process, the right to tell their side of the story and be heard by a neutral, fair fact finder. It sort of throws all that out the window because he did that. He took every step that you would expect somebody to take to clear their name. And it didn't matter because our local resources are being used to collaborate in deportation. And that's happening around the state. But there are some reforms possible. So the 287G ban passed all the way through the General Assembly today. I think we expect the governor to sign it relatively shortly, and that will eliminate those formal partnerships between jails and ICE. But there's another really important piece of legislation, which is the Community Trust Act. The bill number is SB 791. And that will, for police, that will close that loophole. That'll say police cannot share info about the people that they encounter while they're out policing unless there is a judicial warrant or a court order. So no more calling ICE after a traffic stop. We're going to stop sharing information with them by police on the street. And that would make one uniform rule across the state. So you wouldn't have to try to figure out, is it Montgomery County Police behind me or is it Frederick County? Have I crossed the line yet? I don't know. And then with respect to jails, the Community Trust Act would make extra clear that you have to follow the Fourth Amendment. You can't hold somebody for ICE without a judicial warrant. But it would also prevent jails from calling ICE affirmatively to flag people who are arrested who say that they were born outside the US. And it would prevent those jail from calling ICE to alert them, hey, this person's going to be released tomorrow, to facilitate that arrest. Neither of those things make us safer. And we are empowering ICE when our local jails are doing work for ICE. We are acting as a force multiplier. If we're in the jails helping them make arrests of the people who have been arrested for whatever reason, there is more time, there are more ICE resources for them to be out in the street making arrests of our other community members. So it's not a matter of, well, you can have arrests in the jails and that's better than having arrests on the street. The more arrests we have in the jails that we facilitate, that we do their work, the more arrests we will have in the street because their resources will be able to focus out there. So I know Earl is going to talk about some of the local legislation, and I commend the Montgomery County Council for having passed that Trust Act.
Thank you so much. That is a lot of very complicated information that you presented in a very clear way. I'm sure we all appreciate the PowerPoint. Thank you so much. And I'm sure everyone also appreciates the example that you gave with a story. People tend to remember stories. And so thank you. That's great. If I may ask one follow-up question here before we move on. What can counties do to ensure the rights of immigrants and refugee populations, make sure that they're protected when they're in places like in the hospitals and in schools?
So it is difficult for counties to control what ICE does. I think Montgomery County has written a pretty robust trust act that tries to do as much as it can to control what ICE does. But really, at the end of the day, and we should try to do that. There's no reason not to try to do that. But at the end of the day, what states and localities can do best is get their own houses in order, is make sure that their systems are not being co-opted in order to take advantage of their resources, the information that they have, the access that they have in their communities to help ICE make arrests. So we need data privacy. I did not talk about this, but CASA is spearheading a bill to protect at the state level the data of immigrants and everyone, but this is specific to trying to protect data from incursions by ICE and from being sold to ICE. And I think that's very important. So I think it's great to try to put what guardrails we can on ICE's behavior, but the most important and the most effective thing is to make sure that that our systems are secure and protected.
Thank you so much. Okay, finally, I'd like to introduce Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer within the Office of the Executive for Montgomery County, Maryland. His responsibilities include oversight of the daily operations and performance of the county's public safety department, including correction and rehabilitation, policing, emergency management, and homeland security, as well as fire and rescue services. Dr. Stoddard will address what Montgomery County is doing to support the civil and human rights of immigrant populations. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I also want to thank both Alma and Stephanie. I've been able to cross off a number of things I was going to talk about based on their presentations, which is always great for everyone who has questions that we want to save time for. So first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Montgomery County does and doesn't, more importantly, I think doesn't do in the immigration space, and talk about the contrast, well, the evolution of that process, I would say, over the years as we've moved from past administrations into this new Trump administration and the changing way that immigration enforcement has happened in our country. So I'll start by saying the county has operated under an executive order for a number of years, Executive Order 135-19. The county executive L. Rich put into effect back in 2019, which largely governed the way that the county interacted in the immigration space. That now is going to be codified in law by Council President Fanny Gonzalez and her colleagues' new Community Trust Act that was just passed on Tuesday and will be signed by the county executive into law next week. The difference between the executive order and the Trust Act is there's some specific areas in which it's different, but I think it largely is a very similar way of operating from the way that we've operated for the last 6.5 years or so. And as a general principle, what that means is Montgomery County and its agencies do not conduct immigration enforcement at a local level. We don't collect information, store information, or ask questions related to immigration status, except in very limited and specific examples where it's required for an eligibility assessment for a federal program. And even in those limited cases, we ask the person if they want to be assessed for the eligibility in that program, given the implications of that assessment. Furthermore, We do not allow immigration enforcement agents access to non-public areas of county facilities except under the uh, uh, except under the provision of a judicial warrant, not an administrative warrant, as was explained by Stephanie previously. And finally, what we've done is I shouldn't say finally, but we've done training for our county employees to make sure that they understand the expectations for them, both under the executive order and under the new Community Trust Act, including as recently as 10 o'clock this morning. We did a training for county employees to explain, sort of reiterate the expectations under the Community Trust Act. That's talking generally, and I want to get into some of the specifics of the departments that we have in Montgomery County and their roles in supporting our immigrants. So I'll start off with the police department. I think this was alluded to that Montgomery County Police Department strongly believes that we need community trust, and community trust relies on trust that the government that they have here locally is not out to get them. We need victims of crimes and witnesses of crimes to come forward and provide information so that we can address community safety in Montgomery County. To do that, we need people to understand that we do not conduct civil immigration enforcement through Montgomery County Police Department, nor do we share information with ICE related to status. We don't ask about status, as I alluded to before. The other thing we've also done recently is we've changed the markings on our vests. We know often immigration enforcement agents will just put police on their vests, and that obviously erodes community trust because people start to see all law enforcement as the same. We've attempted to, or we are actually replacing that to say, make sure it says Montgomery County Police, so that people can understand that you can trust Montgomery County Police because they don't do immigration enforcement. This has obviously been a huge. We've had a lot of reports, I'm sure, that have come into the CASA line that ended up being Montgomery County Police. We needed to make sure that we sort of separated those two things out so the community could really understand that it was, when their police department was operating versus when immigration enforcement was happening. On the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, obviously the way we operate in Montgomery County, and this will be very similar under the Trust Act. There's definitely some clarity that's been provided through the Trust Act, and I'll state what that is. So what we do in the Montgomery County Department of Correction and Rehabilitation is when we receive a civil detainer from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, first off, we do not hold anyone longer than a judge has mandated, as Stephanie alluded to. That would be a Fourth Amendment violation in our view, and we've never done that. Under very limited circumstances, we will, prior to release, notify for a very limited set of very serious crimes. And as Stephanie alluded to, those serious crimes are not likely to have those individuals end up in our facility anyway. These are crimes of violence like rape, homicide, aggravated assaults, things of that nature. They're very serious crimes, which is going to land someone with a longer than 18-month sentence. And you're going to end up in a state facility, and we won't have custody of the individuals. In very limited circumstances, there will be individuals who have been convicted of those very serious crimes who end up for the very end of their sentence being in Montgomery County. In those limited circumstances, we may notify ICE of their release prior to it happening. But again, I think we've had complaints from ICE already as recently as yesterday about the fact that we're not complying with their detainers, which I took as a badge of honor, frankly. I want to talk a little bit about our Department of Health and Human Services. We have what we refer to as our Lighthouse program, which is a human and medical service eligibility program for immigrants, regardless of status. We work to get people access to healthcare. We work to get people access to all kinds of resources for them, whether it's maternal and child health, it could be testing resources, it could be anything of the like, because obviously, regardless of status, we want people in Montgomery County to be healthy and feel like they have access to adequate medical care. Our Child Protective Services works closely with Montgomery County public school systems. We know that one of the side effects of the broad immigration enforcement platform that we've seen across the country under this administration, we see a lot of families, we see guardianship issues as parents, providers are being taken away in communities, and that leaves behind children who do not have adequate resources or guardianship. And so our Child Protective Services connects those individuals, gets them into the appropriate care environment. Sometimes that can be foster homes. Sometimes that can be connecting them with a relative. And so obviously we work to make sure that we have capacity, and we work with the school system when this happens to try and minimize the effect on those children to the extent that we can. As I alluded to, we have assessment restrictions. So take programs like SNAP. SNAP eligibility requires a immigration assessment by virtue of that eligibility. We will notify the person for whom we are going to, or we want to make sure that they're aware that they may be eligible or not, but that if they want to assess their eligibility, we have to do an immigration assessment, and we give them the option of whether they want to participate in that assessment or not. And finally, we operate the Montgomery Cares program, which provides medical treatment for those who are unable to get insurance or do not have insurance. It provides care, gives the people basic preventive and treatment care through community clinics. Also provides them potentially dental or other specialty care based on eligibility assessment, and is a wonderful resource to make sure that all of our residents are healthy. Our Office of Community Partnerships operates the Gilchrist Immigration Resource Center. That is it's what it is. It's a resource center that provides know your rights training, legal service supports, citizenship training, does classes around language and computer access. It can be done access through an online portal, through call, or a walk-in option, any of those where people can be comfortable. In many cases, they're linking them to nonprofit resources or through organizations like CASA to get direct resources, but it's really a clearinghouse for all of the nonprofit sectors which are willing to support these residents. The county offers this as a sort of ability to connect a whole bunch of resources to individuals in need. Then we also have done things like bystander training. I think this, what can we do to better support our residents? Understand, even if you are not an immigrant, understand how you can help protect immigrants by, if you see immigration enforcement actions, by recording them, by understanding what your rights are as a observer, things of that nature. And then finally, I think one of the things we do a lot of is coordination with the governor's office. Obviously, this is a statewide issue, I think as Stephanie alluded to, and we're trying to coordinate a cohesive response with our like-minded counties across the state so that we could share information about what they're seeing. We share information about what we're seeing on the ground, because obviously if we see things like a surge, that will have a broad-based impact, and we all want to try and get ahead of that and have information about what we may see and what we're experiencing in real time. And so the governor's office has been a great partner in trying to connect counties and municipalities with one another so they can share information about how we are most effectively protecting our residents. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the operations for immigration enforcement in Maryland. I think Amma did a really good job of providing some basic information. I want to add a couple things I think that are some additional detail and context to what she shared. So theoretically, the Baltimore office of ICE should be overseeing operations for ICE in Maryland. What we are functionally seeing on the ground is that they are a enforcement arm of ICE in Maryland, but also the DC office is sending agents into Montgomery County and Southern Prince George's County as well to do enforcement in those jurisdictions. What that means is important. So Amma talked about the deplorable conditions at the Baltimore Detention Center, where many individuals who are detained by ICE in Maryland end up, but not exclusively, because we've had individuals in Montgomery County and Prince George's County detained through the DC field office, whose principal detention location is actually Chantilly, Virginia, which obviously presents additional problems. As was alluded to, there's a limited capacity locally to do detention, which has additional implications. Obviously, that means that people are very quickly moved out to places like Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Texas, and often that occurs before they've been provided an A number. So the families very often don't actually have access to knowing where their loved one is. And when they finally do get access, they're multiple states away, and that has significant implications about them getting resources to their family. I will say that I actually worked with Congressman Raskin's office today they conducted a surprise visit to the Baltimore detention location today, and to observe some of the conditions that were described by my co-presenters today. And I think obviously that the deplorable detention conditions in Baltimore bear great scrutiny by the federal government and by the Congress, and hopefully increased attention to those venues will help ensure that when detentions do occur, they don't result in additional human rights and violations occurring to those individuals. I think I've covered a lot of what I want to do, but I also will mention that, one of the things we've also tried to do is be a connector. We know that there are nonprofits, we know that there are faith-based organizations, we know there are businesses who have strong desires for training of their own. And we've been a clearinghouse to connect them with nonprofits who can provide them with legal advice. Like Caresen has been an excellent organization who has provided training for businesses and nonprofits in the faith community so that they understand how they can limit immigration enforcement access to their non-public spaces, what rights they have under certain conditions with regard to administrative warrants versus judicial warrants, and obviously sort of how they can be generally supportive of of immigrants in our community. As Amma said, in addition to through CASA, there are volunteer opportunities through the Gilchrist Center. Actually, right, if you visit the Gilchrist Center's website, there are opportunities for volunteering there as well. And we encourage civic engagement on supporting our immigrants. And I think the last thing I will say, and I think this was alluded to when discussing the League of Women Voters position, we strongly believe that immigrants are an incredible addition to Montgomery County. They represent, opportunities to improve the diversity of our county, our economic strength and well-being. They provide perspectives and experiences that enrich the community for everyone. And our view is that we should find a way to be welcoming in Montgomery County and frankly, as a country. And our policies and positions in Montgomery County reflect the fact that we believe that immigrants are an incredible positive for our country and should not face the degrading conditions that they've seen under the federal administration and this immigration enforcement regime. And so we've taken what we believe are the best steps to ensure that happens here locally. So I will stop there and happy to entertain questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stoddard. I just have a couple of follow-up questions, but I do want to say that indeed, Montgomery County has had a very long history of being welcoming to immigrants, and let's hope that it stays that way. So, do you know, are there any indications that ICE activity will increase in the coming months in Montgomery County?
Yeah, so this is sort of the question we get a lot. And what I would say is, I think we have every reason to believe we will see a surge in immigration enforcement in Montgomery County and in Maryland. I think it's not a question of if we will see such a surge, it's really a question of when we will see such a surge. And the reason why we believe this is, we know that they have targeted jurisdictions based on their local and statewide political differences with the administration. And certainly we've seen, this is something we've been tracking very closely. We know, for example, that there's been conflicts between the governor and the White House, and I think that that's likely to result in the specific targeting of Maryland and certainly Montgomery County as a location. I can't tell you if it's going to come tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, a month from now, or 6 months from now, but I think we know that the funding increase that came with the bill last year resulted in ICE going from about 10,000 agents nationwide to about 22,000 agents nationwide. And that will result in a baseline increase. Going into this administration, the Baltimore field office of ICE was the smallest regional field office in the country and only had about 17 agents statewide. We know that they're going to be hundreds of additional agents coming to Maryland as a baseline increase, and that's not even what we would refer to as a surge, which is often Customs and Border Protection agents and other federal agents coming in locally for a period of time, like we've seen in Chicago and Minnesota, to really provide a surge. And so that was a long-winded way to say yes, we anticipate that, but I think it's giving some specificity about both the baseline increases that we anticipate in the ICE field office in Maryland, but also the potential for a surge to be stacked on top of that at some point in the future.
Thank you. And one more thing, is it likely that ICE will try to purchase detention centers in Montgomery County? And if so, would the county consider the use of zoning restrictions to prohibit these purchases for space?
It's certainly something we're taking a look at, and I think we would. I mean, obviously, I think the local elected officials, including county executive, would be supportive of such restrictions. I know that the other places like Howard County are considering them, and we're watching those things very closely to understand how they're effectively able to do them to make sure that we can follow along there. Um, we have we track this very closely with the GSA and others who try to lease spaces or acquire spaces. And obviously, we've tracked the reports about the warehouse space in Washington County and what's happening in Howard County as well. Um, we have heard various reports about different local, smaller satellite offices, for lack of a better way to describe them, which may not have detention capability, but would get agents situated locally much closer. And we obviously are tracking that very closely as well.
Well, thank you, everyone. Now we'll move on to the question and answer portion of our program. We encourage you to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Please type in your question. Also, if you would like an answer from a specific panelist, please put their name in there. And we will try to answer as many questions as time allows in this program. We do end at 8:30, so I just want to keep that, have everyone keep that in mind. And we'll take a look at the questions. As I'm
And
looking, oh,
Maria, I would
yeah.
just say I have been frantically typing answers to as many questions as possible. And so, folks, please take a look at those answers also. And yes, happy to take any additional questions. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Is our audience able to see those answers in the chat? Just want to make sure.
They're in the Q&A, so they're open questions and then they're typed in answers. Oh, are folks not able to see these answers? Oh my.
Okay. Well, we can ask some questions and then maybe we can collect these answers and allow people to see them in another way. Wow, thank you so much. Um, so I'll just start with one more question for Dr. Stoddard here, since I have it right here. To what extent do Montgomery County Police Department officers currently collaborate with ICE, specifically with traffic stops? Do you think that's going to change at all?
So we don't collaborate with ICE at all on traffic stops. We don't provide them information. Um, we generally don't, if ICE were conducting an enforcement action, we wouldn't support them in conducting that enforcement action. Um, I think I want to be crystal clear about that. We do not get involved with it. Frankly, there when we do have issues where people maybe have been detained by ICE locally and we try to ask whether there's any information we can get, whether it's police or anyone else, ICE is unresponsive to us. And so frankly, there's just no either operational, functional, or other kind of relationship that we have with immigration enforcement in Montgomery County.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Yes, Amma, you're right. People can see the answer, so thank you. That's great. I'm limited in what I can see here, so I will just look at the questions here. Let's see. Uh, Here we go. If someone comes to my door claiming to be ICE and demands to be let in, and who even knows if they are ICE or not, can I call Montgomery County Police about a potential home invasion? Will anyone come? And will they tell ICE to back off?
So I'm happy to start and give anyone. So if you have a credible belief that you're facing a home invasion, you absolutely should call 911 and the Montgomery County Police Department will come. Now, upon arrival, if whom the persons purporting to be ICE are there, if they obviously have a judicial warrant, then the police department will not be able to stop them from conducting whatever enforcement action they have. If they have an administrative warrant, the police department will neither support them in conducting those efforts. And I think you should be clear that you have the right to not open your door and not provide them access. I'm looking to the lawyer, my panelist lawyers to confirm that, but I'm pretty confident in that answer. But generally speaking, the Montgomery County, if you believe you have a credible risk of a home invasion, or we've had questions about people believing they're witnessing a kidnapping in progress, if you have a credible belief that those things are happening, you can call 911 and report them. If you have a credible belief that it is simply immigrant, not simply, if it is you have a credible belief that it is immigration enforcement, then obviously I would not necessarily encourage you to call 911 in those cases, because the Montgomery County Police Department will come if they're available in other cases, and will be able to identify whether the person is an immigration enforcement agent or not. But obviously, I don't want I don't want police officers running across the county lights and sirens for what may end up being, in some cases, federally allowable immigration enforcement. I think that's the right balance that people have to understand.
Yes, thank you. It is a complicated issue. So I think this question is directed to Stephanie Wolf. Let's see, what mechanisms are in place to make police and jail operators accountable for restrictions on ICE? Does accountability rest with citizens? Even if rules and laws are in place to be effective, they must be enforced.
So the question of who enforces all of this is always a great question, and I, I appreciate you asking it. Um, in the in the legislation that I mentioned, the 287G ban and the Community Trust Act, there is not a clear penalty provision, right? So it doesn't make it a crime for a jail official to share this information. It doesn't make it a crime for a police officer to share this information. However, we're putting it down in Maryland law, and by putting it in Maryland law, that means you have recourse to Maryland courts, which is important. And so we have wonderful organizations like CASA and the ACLU and many others who will be able to enforce those rights if they're being violated, and particularly if they're being, willfully violated. But I think the first line of defense, and I hope Earl will continue his willingness to partner with us on this, but the first line of defense is your local officials training people effectively. So when you pass the Community Trust Act, it's not enough that the legislation is on the books. Somebody has to go to the jail and teach the guy who's working the night shift the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant, and make clear, hey, the policy has changed and you can't call under these circumstances anymore. And that's like tough, boring slog of an assignment, but it's the most important part. We've got to implement correctly. So applaud your local officials and your state officials when they pass the right law, but then let them know you really need follow through on the implementation.
If I may add to, I think it's important to recognize that in Maryland, there was, it's sort of related. There was a Police Accountability Act passed back in 2021, which created a number of civilian police accountability boards and administrative charging committees in every jurisdiction across the state. And one of the things that they do is those civilian bodies investigate complaints of administrative policy violations that impact members of the public. And so the Montgomery County Police Department, for example, has a function code 520, which governs the rules essentially around how they interact with foreign nationals and the limitations that they have with regard to cooperation with ICE. And if an officer were found to be in violation of that policy, they could face administrative discipline through that process as well. And so if people believe they've observed a violation of the county's policy, they can certainly file a complaint through the Police Accountability Board, and that would be investigated and adjudicated through the Administrative Charging Committee process for those potential administrative violations.
Okay, great, thank you. I think maybe Amma can answer this question, but this question says, what have you learned from other states who have had surges that will help us become better prepared to support the community here? So I guess this is a question about lessons learned from other places. And I mean, I can open it up to anybody, but whoever would like to answer that.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually really want to hear from Earl on this because I want to hear what has Montgomery County learned and is intended to perhaps, like implement or put in place. So yes, Earl, please.
Sure. So
Thank you.
actually did a call about 2 weeks ago with the city of Chicago, the mayor's office, to talk about their experience on the ground with their surge. And we actually had a call, I think the day, it ended up being the day before or the day after that. I can't remember exactly timing with folks from Minneapolis. And their experience was a fair bit different even than what Chicago saw, because Chicago saw an increase, as they said, of about 350 agents coming into the city of Chicago, whereas Minneapolis saw about a surge of about 3,000 agents coming into the city of Minneapolis. And so the that had implications for their resourcing and things of that nature. Some of the things that I think were particularly stood out to us, I think when we met with Chicago, I would say that we were doing about 90% of what they recommended that we do as a preparation for surge. However, they did say, there are opportunities to look at, for example, what local businesses are interacting with immigration enforcement, for example, hotels and other businesses that may be interacting and allowing and frankly, functionally supporting immigration enforcement by allowing ICE to utilize their space for things, and developing potentially contract provisions for preventing, the localities from doing businesses or doing business with organizations that support the surges that they saw in their locations. There was a lot of conversation around how you document and store information related to, for example, body worn camera of local police that records immigration enforcement actions that they come upon, how you preserve that for evidentiary value should there be a civil suit or other action taken. Obviously, there's been a lot of problems, I would say, with the investigations that the administration is conducting of its own agents that may not necessarily be shared by the next administration, that stance. And so you want to preserve information that you have so that there could be a future, either administrative or criminal action to be taken against those who violate civil rights, for example. One of the other things that was shared out of Minneapolis that we found particularly troubling is that immigration enforcement agents, and this is actually something that was observed during the civil rights movement, they're beginning to adopt and mimic the local mutual aid supporters. They will act like they are assistants on the ground to try and encourage people to interact with them, and then we'll come back later to conduct immigration enforcement actions against individuals they interact with. And so that has encouraged the development of more hyper local response networks, so that the people who are responding in any geographic area will know their fellow co-responders, and you can develop trusted, knowledgeable relationships with individuals, and therefore it can help you identify those individuals who are not part of the hyper local response network and may represent a potential immigration agent trying to impersonate or enter into the mutual aid network to try and get additional information about those they may be targeting. The other thing I think that Chicago really recommended is having more frequent local conversations. What they described is basically there need to be more information sharing that flowed down from the state, and in their case through their county, to their mutual aid and advocate communities, and then having a platform and a network where information can flow up, concerns can flow up, and so that there was coordination, collaboration to support immigrants on the ground. And they said basically that those meetings didn't necessarily have to be always that they didn't have to always be top down or bottom up. It was really meant to be a clearinghouse and having a constant flow of communication for what people are seeing and experiencing on the ground, particularly during a surge when it becomes most relevant for the day-to-day changes that may occur. So I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Thanks. And I think Alma can jump in here with a follow-up question. Thank you.
Yes, well, perhaps not a follow-up question to what Earl shared, but certainly I do see that there were a lot of questions about bond and habeas in the Q&A. So I just wanted to clarify little bit. So again, what is happening, right, is that the Department of Justice, which is also a part of of course, our federal administration, under which the Board of Immigration Appeals and the immigration court system falls, issued a decision in September 2025, right? Rendering ineligible an entire category of people who entered this country without inspection, or we can just say people who entered the country unlawfully, no matter how far back in life they entered the country, that those individuals are now ineligible to request a bond from an immigration judge. So the alternative that people have been having to explore, the route that people now have to go through, is to go to federal district court, right? Which is a real Article 3 court, right? Not an immigration court, to file claims, petitions for habeas corpus, right? Saying that I am being unlawfully detained by the government and I'm asking that I be released, right? So the last time that I looked at the numbers, I looked at numbers about 2 weeks ago. In 2024, there were only two habeas petitions filed against ICE for unlawful detention here in Maryland. In 2025, that number was 184, right? Again, because that is the only avenue now that a lot of people have. It is quite problematic though, because here in Maryland, our federal district judges are overwhelmingly responding in favor of the individual who is in ICE custody, ruling in their favor. But what we also know is that, again, ICE kind of quickly moves people from Maryland to other detention centers. So someone asked about the Fifth Circuit, right? The Fifth Circuit just affirmed that September 2025 ruling that rendered individuals ineligible for bond. And the Fifth Circuit is where really the large majority of people are sent for long-term ICE detention. That covers Texas, right? And so that I hope that that answers the question, because people are asking, what about habeas? What about habeas? Yes, people are having to now look to habeas, but it is a much more complex process. People are not able to navigate the process without attorneys. We, attempt to assist people to with the process pro se. Because I think the one thing that people don't understand about the immigration system is that there is no right to a court-appointed attorney, right? So people are the overwhelming majority of people are having to navigate this process of being detained by ICE and seeking release and seeking to defend from deportation without a lawyer either. So now they're having to navigate a whole different venue because they cannot request release, they cannot request bond from the immigration judge. So I hope that that helps clarify that a little bit, because I think I saw maybe 8 questions related to that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. We have time for a couple more questions. There is a question about green cards. Do you have any advice for someone currently going through the green card application process?
I think that that's not necessarily a question that we can answer on this call. At this point, immigration applications are being reviewed much more critically than in the past. The risk is higher, right? I think, what I would say is just make sure that you are reviewing the criteria as closely as possible on the USCIS website, and that you are disclosing everything that you need to disclose. Honestly, under this administration, my recommendation is for people to consult with attorneys or be represented by attorneys before submitting any immigration applications, just because the risk is higher than it has been in the past of an adverse consequence from submitting an application.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. There are a couple questions here about masks, and one is, would a state ICE mask law be enforceable? We'd like to adjust masks.
I mean, I will say that I think the Attorney General has opined that I think it would be very difficult to enforce on federal agents a mask ban. But I think, as Stephanie alluded to with the previous related issue, there's no reason we shouldn't be trying, and there's no reason we shouldn't be stating our values as a state. And so I think Montgomery County has been largely supportive of state efforts to try and do this statewide. And there is a corresponding local bill that's been put forward by Councilmember Jawando. Obviously, I think that the position of that on that bill will be informed by what happens at the state level, and we'll see what comes out of Annapolis on this point. But I think it would be very difficult to enforce constitutionally, just given the separation of authorities. And I think the Attorney General has largely opined in that direction as well. But again, there's no reason we shouldn't be both trying and I think more importantly, stating our values that if you require masks to do law enforcement, you're probably not enforcing the right laws, or at least in the right way.
Thank you. Well, I think this will be it for the question and answer part of this program. Would any of our three guests like to conclude with something? I'd like to give you the last word.
I think I'll just say, I think all of us would say, continue to be engaged on this issue. Obviously, we have to do what we can to protect immigrants locally and make sure that the values of this county are upheld and frankly are spread beyond our borders to the extent that we can. And there's a lot of ways you can be engaged. I think there are volunteer opportunities both with the nonprofits and with the county to serve and support immigrants, and we welcome any support that we can get from anyone to participate or anyone else in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much to all our guests. I'm going to turn it over to Diane. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to each of you, the speakers and moderator, for tonight's very interesting presentation. But that's all the time we have. If you have enjoyed this program and want to learn more about, support, and or join the League of Women Voters, go to LWVMOCOMD.org. The League is also currently studying the situation of county immigrants and will hold discussion group meetings next month to continue this conversation. The meetings will be on our website. With that, we will say thank you to our esteemed presenters, to everyone watching, and to Montgomery History, our co-sponsor. Good evening.